Borja, it's an honour to be asked to speak at a Republican event in Belfast. An honour that's all the more great when it's in a place like Milltown, along with so many people who've given so much to the struggle over the years, and beside the graves of our dead volunteers. So I just want to thank the committee for extending the invite, given today that's in at the 99th anniversary of the Rising, I think it's probably appropriate to talk about the 100th anniversary, which is coming up next year. The 16 Rising, it was probably the most important event in Irish history since the genocide and ethnic cleansing of the 1840s. It's probably the single most important event in that period of 160 years. In the part of Ireland I'm living in, there's a debate going on at the moment, and it's about the nature of the commemorations. How will 1916 be remembered? And there's two sides in this debate. On one side is a political establishment, and they want a low-key commemoration focused on remembrance without any meaningful reference to politics. No real point of reference to the politics that made the Rising not just necessary but justified. And the political establishment in the South, they intend to remember the British soldier as equal to the Republican volunteer. That's the kind of commemoration they want this time next year. They intend to use the centenary to reinforce their twisted version of Irish history, to justify a counter-revolution, to justify the partitioning of Ireland, to justify the abandonment of the nationalist people in the 6 counties, justify the unionist veto, and to justify the ongoing occupation of the 6 counties. In other words, they want to use the centenary to reinforce the status quo. They produced a video before Christmas, some of you probably saw it. It was the official state video for 2016. Had images of the British Queen in it, David Cameron, Ian Paisley, Bob Geldof, Bono, the whole lot. Not a single rebel. No mention of 1916 other than the word 1916. No pictures of the GPO, no pictures of Connolly or Pearse. That's the kind of remembrance that they want. And as we're getting closer to 2016, there's all kinds of unexpected people are proclaiming their Republican credentials. These closet Republicans who are now coming out have spent decades undermining the Republican struggle and undermining the position of the Irish Republican cause and the fight for national freedom. These same members of the establishment are now presenting themselves as the true inheritors of 16. And unfortunately, these old enemies, the blue shirts and the usual suspects, they've now been joined by others who would at one point have vociferously opposed the very things that the blue shirts stood for. So we now have a situation where the very same people who are slavishly implementing austerity on the basis of orders from Westminster and the Troika are telling us that they support the ideals of independence and sovereignty contained within the 1916 proclamation. It's ludicrous. How can you possibly create a society that treats all of the children of the nation equally when you want the most profitable companies in the world to pay less tax? How can we have public healthcare and education and housing when the elite get away with paying no tax? This is the contradiction now, where we have people who are claiming to uphold the proclamation, who claim they want a society that is equal, where the children of the nation are cherished equally, but at the same time those same people are intent on lining the pockets of the rich. You can't support the unionist veto of Irish democracy and simultaneously support the indefeasible right of the nation to be free. You can't build an equal society while you line the pockets of the rich. Now, on the other side of that debate, there are people like us, Irish citizens who believe that the 1916 Rising was an entirely justified insurrection that significantly advanced the cause of Irish freedom. We don't want to just remember 1916. We want to celebrate it. We want to celebrate the integrity, the courage and the vision of the women and men who took up arms to assert the right of the nation to be free. There's a massive difference between commemoration and celebration. We want to focus on the unfinished business of the proclamation and the rising. We want greater numbers of people to come to understand the revolutionary politics of Connolly and the Citizen Army that was right at the heart of the 1916 rising and the proclamation of the Republic. In other words, we hope the centenary will create momentum for maximum change that will shatter the status quo. The political establishment intend to use the centenary to reinforce the status quo. And that debate about the 1916 rising, it's falling along familiar lines. It's at least, in part, a proxy debate about other much more recent things, and things much closer to home here in Belfast. It's a debate about the rights and wrongs of the war that erupted in the 1960s and early 1970s. It's a debate about the legacy of the volunteers who prosecuted that war, many of whom lie buried in this graveyard. It's a debate about the ability of 1 million Irish citizens based in the 6 counties to veto the wishes of the 5 million of the rest of us. It's a debate about how the Good Friday Treaty fundamentally contradicts the rights enshrined in the 1916 proclamation. Anyone that reads the two documents can see they do not match. You cannot simultaneously support the 1916 proclamation and the inherent, indefeasible right of the Irish nation to be free, and simultaneously support the Unionist veto. We revolutionary Republicans, we socialist Republicans, must do all in our power to ensure that our side of the debate is heard by as many people as possible over the next 12 months and beyond. So how should the 1916 centenary be marked? Well, we already know that the Dublin government and some political parties and some trade unions are going to do. They've already mapped out their programme of events for 16. There's going to be lots of rhetoric, lots of pantomime, lots of people dressing up in costumes. But there is going to be very little in the way of meaningful politics. But what about our communities? How are our communities going to celebrate the 1916 rising? Are they going to wait for the political establishment to tell them when and how and where to mark the centenary? I'm part of a political party, but I'm telling you that the rising is too important to be left. The centenary of the rising, it's too important to be left to political parties or trade unions. We need communities to take ownership of the centenary anniversary. Just imagine it. Imagine communities all across the 32 counties organising their own celebrations of the rising. In their own streets, their own estates, their own villages. Imagine if communities, free from the constraints of governments or political parties or trade unions, organised their own public debates about the rising, erect their own monuments, organise their own community parties and celebrations of the people and the politics in 1916, because that's fundamentally what it's about. It's about getting the politics out there. If the politics get out there, everything else will follow. Nobody could read the writings of Pearse or the writings of Connolly, or learn about the Fenians or the IRB or the Citizen Army. Nobody could learn about those things and not be brought towards the Republican position. And by Republican position, I mean the revolutionary Republican position. So what's to stop any of us here from talking to our neighbours and our friends and our family and organise community-based celebrations? As I say, the erecting of a plaque or a statue, the organisation of a public meeting, a party for the kids to mark the centenary. Imagine the potential for change that could be unleashed if very large numbers of people came to understand and then support the politics of 16. Because those politics are about one thing and one thing alone: the complete destruction of the old order and the replacement of that old order with a new order, a Republican order. A Republican order based upon liberty, equality and community. And at a national level, outside of our own local communities, what could the talking heads up in Stormont or Leinster House do if communities came together to celebrate the centenary and to demand the completion of the unfinished business of 1916, to demand an end to British rule and the establishment of a 32-county republic. Imagine the impact of citizens who live in the occupied counties marching alongside citizens in the 26 counties, collectively demanding a British withdrawal from Ireland, not asking permission for a rigged referendum, demanding restoration of our right to national sovereignty. Imagine the strength of that. For those of you who live in the 6 counties and who still refuse to accept British rule, you cannot allow yourselves to be excluded from the 1916 commemorations across the British imposed border. We cannot allow the nationalist population in the 6 counties to be the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about, while Enda Kenny and Burton and the rest of them sit outside the GPO saluting the parade. Nobody wants to talk about the million nationalists trapped in British occupied Ireland. And there are many of us in the south that would be more than happy to support the people of the 6 counties in mobilising in Dublin at some point during 2016 to make that point. There is unfinished business. This is not some ancient historical matter. It's today and it's now and it's people, real rights. I'll finish up just talk about our own Republican message, our socialist Republican message. It was at the heart of 16. The Citizen Army and many members of the volunteers in the IRB, they weren't simply narrow nationalists. They were about the business of a revolution, a cultural revolution, a social revolution, a political national revolution, and an economic revolution. And that message, that message and that vision, it's one of hope. It's one of possibility. Our politics are not negative. Our politics are not radical or unachievable. It's the current system is the system that's radical. You know, the notion that a small, tiny percentage of people would dominate power and politics, that's a radical proposal. Our proposal isn't radical. Our proposal is very reasonable, that ordinary people will be in control of their own destiny, their own economy, their own political system. So let's, over the next 12 months, set ourselves this challenge of spreading that message of hope and of possibility, spreading our socialist Republican message of a democratic economy and an equal society where everybody can reach their full potential, of the country that can be built after the British have left and after this capitalist system has been taken apart. Why don't we set ourselves that challenge of spreading that message over the next 12 months, working with our family and our neighbours and our friends to spread and celebrate the revolutionary politics of 16. And let's start organising for community-based celebrations of the centenary in our streets, in our estates, in our villages, in our towns and our cities. And let us put the unfinished business of 1916 at the very heart of the 2016 celebrations. That, my friends, will be a very fitting tribute to those who gave their lives in the fight for freedom before 16, during 16 and since 1916. Rwy'n míle maith.